hopeful, isn't it?
It is. And there is our caller.
All right.
Northwest Dirt News, how are you? Hello, Patty?
Yes, sir. How
There
you
she
doing?
is.
Good. How are you doing?
Well, I'll tell you what. It's kind of hard to talk to you tonight simply because one of our Kansas State teams has made it to the final, the Sweet 16, and we're watching that. Turn the volume down and talking to you.
Well, hit pause so you don't miss anything.
Patty is hardcore Kansas. She's was it Rock Chalk Jayhawk, right?
Sir, I didn't hear you. I apologize.
I said you're a hardcore Kansas fan, Rock Chalk Jayhawk, right?
There you go. But tonight we're watching Kansas State, and then Jayhawks play tomorrow night.
Well, we want to wish those guys the best of luck. I know you're a big fan, and I want to say thanks for taking your time out this evening, Patty, because I know you had a lot going on, and the first time we spoke earlier, you were actually cooking dinner for your husband.
Yeah, you got to do those things. You know, when you're home, that's it. That's what you do.
Right. So we were talking as a crew here at Moxie Media Promotions a couple weeks ago about about the proposals and marketing that these race teams do. And I thought, I know somebody really good in that field, and I thought I'd give you a call or a text and see if you'd be willing to come on the show. And I'm so happy that you did, because I know that not just the four of us here in the studio, but everybody listening is going to learn a lot from you. I want to talk about your resume a little bit. Now, you've had 4 really, really good jobs in the racing industry. Can you kind of give us your background?
Sure. I actually grew up in motorcycling with a father that was the head of the AMA District 36, which was Northern California. So I've been in racing all my life. And when I was 17, I came home from the Easter Road Race Series and what they called the Player Series, John Player, and came home from England and got lucky enough to talk to a Bell Helmets rep. And he said, come see me when you're, out of high school. We'd love to have you work for our company.
Wow.
So I moved to Southern California, went to work during the day on a 4-day 40, working worked in the marketing department, and eventually became the marketing and sales director for the bicycle helmet.
Okay.
And then on to Ascot Park in the evenings, where we were lucky and fortunate enough to race 7 days a week, basically. So I worked for J.C. Agajanian at night and on the weekends, and then worked for Bell Helmets during the day.
Wow.
Did you hear the last name Agajanian she dropped? You hear that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big name
Yeah,
in
it is.
racing.
Yeah.
It was really exciting, but I've got to tell you something that was really, really kind of funny on my part. Growing up motorcycling, sure, I knew who Jewel Leonard was and all of the hot shoes from Northern California all the way through Seattle and Washington. We used to come up and we'd race at Clackamas, and we'd race at Mount St. Helena's for the, I'm trying to think of what it was called. It was a TT, and we'd race there. So I knew, a lot of your racers from up north. So going to work for Ascot, and I am basically learning to become a public relations person. And so I'm working in the office where you would come and get your credentials. And this gentleman walks in, and, I wasn't really that known about car racers and stuff like that. And I said, sir, may I have your name? And he said, my name? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, my name is Rufus Jones. And I'm thinking, Rufus Jones?
Parnelli.
Never heard of that. Absolutely had no idea that it was Parnelli Jones.
Oh, my gosh.
Everybody that knows J.C. Agajanian knows that he wore $1 million hat. It was a huge Stetson. And I can see this Stetson start rising above the partition that separated our office. And here he came, and I'm like, oh, boy. Parnelli says she doesn't know you, but I guarantee you she won't forget you.
No doubt about that.
Wow.
I actually I got to meet Parnelli Jones when I was a kid at Las Vegas at the Bull Ring, Thursday Night Thunder midget race, the USAC deal, and
right.
Just a everyday guy. You'd never know who he was in racing if you didn't know him. He just
very humble.
Very
humble.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure
And
to
of
meet
course,
those
his
guys.
grandsons, I've got to tell you guys real quick. Parnelli had 2 boys. He had PJ, and he had Paige. And Paige was the one, unfortunately, that got hurt at, I believe it was Terre Haute, and he got hurt in a midget and had he had a brain problem as well as partially, just about died. And he's regained a lot of that, and he's come back, and he's got 3 healthy kids, and he lives with his family in Arizona. The older boy, PJ was the IndyCar driver, tried his best at some of the NASCAR stuff, and then later had 2 sons, and they're both kicking tail right now. They're racing up and down California coast. Jace is the oldest, and he is running in your late model stock cars. And of course, when there's nothing else to do, they're out running trophy trucks in the off-road desert. So, good family.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. I'll tell you a real quick story about that Las Vegas deal tonight. I went down to visit my uncle in Vegas, and he says, "Hey, let's go check out the racetrack." We drive out there, and it's like it was a Thursday night, and I'm thinking nothing's going on. Massive, massive haulers. What is going on here? This is like a big-time practice session. It was Thursday Night Thunder with the USAC midgets. Just happens to be we're sitting in the grandstands watching, and I'll tell you about the end of the race. It was Jeff Gordon in the Diet Pepsi car. It was P.J. Jones and Sleepy Trip. They came out of turn 4 on the last lap, 3 wide, banging doors, smoking the tires, and PJ went from 3rd to 1st to win it on his 18th birthday. And you want to talk about a celebration? I mean, it was a crazy finish, but right then and there you knew, yep, that kid's got the family genes. He's going to be a hell of a racer, and sure, and I mean, he did really turn out to be a great talent.
Yeah, he really did, and just he's recovered as best as he can with the brain injury, and he's gotten a lot of his faculties back, and if you saw him today walking, you wouldn't know that there was anything wrong. And he does wear glasses, so that kind of changed his look, so sometimes he might get overlooked in the pits, but just a good kid, absolutely a good kid.
That's
awesome. I watched him when he came back here. Well, what happened at Bell Helmets and at Ascot, in 1980, I got asked by Greg Wells, who was a USAC sprint car champion. He asked me if I wanted to come back to Kansas City and go to work for his company. And I was so excited because I could be 2 hours into Iowa or 2.5 hours into Oklahoma. And I just saw such potential to get more involved in racing that I came back in and gave my notice at Bell Helmets and handed them a 5,000 helmet order for bicycle helmets with the Twin Bicycle Company. And I said, guys, I really like this, but it really hurts when these men shave their legs better than I can shave mine. So that was kind of the out. And within 2 weeks, I was living in Kansas City. And Greg Weld was just a wealth of information, and of course got to meet the family. And later on, of course, watched them build the Batmobile at the shop there, which is what the modified was called that raced at Syracuse that Gary Ballou drove and Kenny Weld built. And it surpassed any of the USAC titles. And we had Don King and a couple of others there in the shop that were flown in to make sure that it was in every possibility of the rule book for the DIRT now. But back then it was just really called the New York Modifieds. So, 1980 was a good year to get involved. And I took over the Weld program and developed a clothing line. And then Greg came to me and he says, okay, I want to go late model stock car racing. And at that point, it was just like, okay. So I picked up the phone and I met with the 2 late model stock car gurus, which were, trying to think of his name. They were both named Ed. One was Sanger and the other one was Ed.
Was it Howe?
Say again?
Was it Ed Howe?
Ed Howe, correct. And so went up there and visited both men, went to Michigan, and also went over to Sanger's place and met with them and came back and I said, Greg, we use a 9-inch rear end for the right out of the chassis, I said, so we have to make it a big wheel on the inside. I said, with the 9-inch, it'll bolt up real good. He says, okay, what kind of offsets do we need? And I said, well, best I can figure is Hal builds everything on the 1/2-inch, and the other one, Sanger, he builds everything on the 1/4-inch. He goes, Pattie, we can't do that. He says, we can't build a 15 by 10 and a half and a quarter and, all of those sizes. I said, no, I know it would be a nightmare. And I said, I got to tell you something else. And he goes, what's that? And I said, I hear that there's a new tire coming out. The circumference is going to be 97 inches. And I said, we've got to consider that, and we've got to build a 15 by 14 for that 97-inch tire. He says, well, Goodyear hasn't called me. And I said, it's not a Goodyear tire. He says, who's the tire? And I said, Hoosier. He says, what? I said, yep. I said, they're going to build a 97-inch tire to go on our 15-14 wheel that I told him we could have by September for the World 100. He just looked at me and rolled his eyes, and we showed up, and it was so funny. It was just such a great deal because we sold out of wheels, and Hoosier was there with Mike Allgaier, and you'll recognize that name because Justin is currently racing for Junior Racing, which is Dale Earnhardt Jr.,
Right.
and he drives the number 7 car. Well, Mike is the father, and so Mike has got this truck that we're in, and we're driving up to Eldora, and he says to me, you got to look out the window. I said, what do you mean you got to look out the window? He said, there's people on the ground that camp out, and we got to make sure we don't run over anybody. And it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I've got my head outside the window, and I'm looking out the passenger side, and I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, I have never been to one of these kind of races, have no idea what to expect, and now you're telling me not to run over anybody. So away we go. We get in the pits, and at that point, the semi for Hoosier comes in, and Bob Newton, who, of course, was the matriarch and the family pride and joy president of the company, and he gets out with this manifest, and he says, how many tires do you want? Mike says, I'll take everything you got. And he looks at him, and he says, what? He said, I'll take every tire you got. So he just hands him the bill of lading, and Mike signs it. And then he turns around to me, and he hands me the bill of lading, and he said, okay, you know the two deals on the tires? I said, yeah. They go on the 97. He goes, you okay? He says, so we got short, and we got shorters. And I said, what's a shorter? He says, under 97. And he said, and you got to allow adjustment of 4 inches. I'm like, a tire education, 4 o'clock in the morning, no coffee, and you want me to charge how much? It was just crazy. But we sold every single tire that we brought to the races, and I believe that was the year that Larry Moore won. So, I mean, it was truly an experience, but it was the right time and being at the right place. And I got to tell you guys, that is what sponsorship is about, being at the right place at the right time. And I've talked about sponsors before. You don't have to be a track record holder. You don't have to be the track champion. You can go out there, and as long as you have a list of either in the program, get all of the sponsors that have bought ads in the weekly program or the billboards, and you start out with that, and you call them up, and they say to you, well, you're the first racer that's ever called us about getting sponsorship. What can you do for us? And then the racer goes,
Exactly.
Have it down. You really got to have it down. What I can do for you, sir, is I know that you sell tires, and I can hand out coupons right here in the pit area to an exposure of 14 weeks of racing on Friday night at this particular track. Now, what have you done? You have actually set up a stand in your pit area where you would normally be selling your T-shirts, and you're handing out coupons to people to get them to bring that coupon in and get a set of tires for your passenger car. So those are just some of the ways that you have to work sponsorship. it's not about